Welcome to CES 2025. I'm Dr. Shawn DuBravac, and we're here to talk about Deloitte's Global Automotive Consumer Study. I'm here with Deloitte's very own Lisa Walker. Lisa, talk to me a little bit about some of the key themes that we saw in this year's Global Automotive Consumer Study.
Shawn, it's so great to be with you today. I'm absolutely loving the energy at CES, and I'm super excited to talk about our automotive consumer study. There are a number of trends that we found that are really interesting and compelling to talk about. Certainly the first and the big elephant in the room is, well, what's happening with powertrain technology, right? And what do we see in terms of consumer acceptance and demand? The second piece that I'm interested to get into is autonomous and AI and the varied kind of acceptance and levels of trust across the globe in our different markets. And we should also explore topics around loyalty and brand loyalty. And what do we see in terms of more intention to switch brands across markets globally?
So let's dive into powertrains. There's all this talk about electric vehicles. Here at CES, you see everything from electric to hybrids to ICE to to hydrogen, looking at all different types of powertrains. What do you see consumers saying when it comes to the future of powertrains?
Yeah, well, without question, there's a lot of excitement here. And we've seen some interesting trends around a shift into hybrid technology that we haven't seen as much in the past. So in the US in particular, for instance, we've seen an increase of about 5% in consumer intention to move into a hybrid technology. And that is at a rate increase that we haven't seen in the past. Now, what's interesting is, of course, at the same time, we've seen a flattening in the demand curve for BEV. But relative to our study last year, we saw a bigger decline. So again, we're really seeing a stabilization around interest in BEV intent to buy, not just in the US, but globally.
Some of that growth in hybrid interest, is that sustainable? Is that something that we're going to continue to see moving forward? Does it grow, or do you see it as something that's more temporary in nature? Is it something that's just kind of related to the environment that we're in today?
I expect, based upon what we're seeing in the study, that it will at least intentionally, I think, grow in the next few years because of the fact that consumers have been compelled by all of the new interest and talk and kind of better academic understanding of what is EV that has shifted buyers out of ICE platforms. So for instance, on the flip side, when we look at ICE intent to buy, that has declined year over year in the US by 5%. So increase in hybrid by 5%, decrease in ICE. I think that's something we really need to be focused on here in the US. But bear in mind, in countries like Japan, there's actually been an increase in intent to buy ICE vehicles. But of course, we have to really think about what is that culture around automotive in those countries where, in Japan, for instance, there's a greater reliance on mass transit.
Yeah, wow. So you see it as something that's here to stay, that's potentially growing. People like the attributes of an electric vehicle, but maybe they want to ensure that they have the range that an ICE provides them, and so something in that kind of hybrid environment works for them. What does this mean for the future of ICE manufacturers? How should they be thinking about what the future means for them?
The biggest challenge and opportunity at the same time is managing the complexity of a much broader, much more diversified set of powertrain options, right? And that will continue into the future as ICE demand declines over an extended period of time than potentially OEMs had thought or hoped for, right? So really the challenge is figuring out where to play and how to win in every single market globally around the right offering set. But certainly the challenge will also be managing the complexity of the component parts in that massive array of options for consumers.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point that it isn't a universal experience that everybody in the world is feeling, that countries are different and the unique tastes and preferences of individual consumers in different parts of the world are influencing what auto manufacturers should be thinking about. So it isn't a one single strategy rules them all, but to really look at individual country demand, and that's where the study really helps. when it comes to charging, what are we seeing in the study? What are consumers thinking about when it comes to the future of charging as they move into that hybrid and even that BEV marketplace?
I'm so glad you asked. This is a really, really interesting one because, of course, we all, I think, know that there's a tendency for range anxiety, not just a tendency, but a very real kind of concern about, can I get to where I need to be, right? But the interesting thing we found in the study, because we've evaluated this year over year, is that in fact, if you look in the US, for instance, all of our consumers who intend to buy a pure BEV platform actually intend at an 80% rate, almost 80%, intend to install charging in-home, right? So it begs the question, do we really need that massive investment in broad public infrastructure? Or is there a better way to strike a balance between investment in enablement of residential and commercial or public at the same time?
Yeah, that's really interesting because you hear so much about this concern about publicly available charging, but what I hear from you is the study suggests maybe that's overblown. Maybe the reality is that consumers are going to be building out infrastructures within their own homes. They'll be mostly charging from their own homes. And so this concern about lack of EV infrastructure isn't the headwind that many people think it might be.
It might not be, yes. And at the same time, another thing that's interesting I want to point out is that if you think about the time to charge, I think there's this notion that, okay, well, we have to have equivalent or at parity time to fuel just as you would at the pump. But in fact, what our study has shown is a very large number of our consumers are willing to spend 20 to 40 minutes waiting for a full charger up to 80% charge, which is kind of the standard for daily kind of driving and commuting. But fundamentally, that kind of begs the question, are we willing to kind of take a little bit more time for the right solution?
Yeah, well, I think one of the beauties here at CES is you do see not just everything that's happening in the EV marketplace, but you also see a real focus on the EV charging. And it is this beautiful intersection here at CES that has for so many years been focused on the future of the home. Now we see EV becoming a key piece of that home. And as we see the cabin experience really evolving and changing, you could imagine, maybe I'm not so concerned about charging because I've got this beautiful large display and I can watch content or I can do other things from the confines of my own vehicle. So there's lots of very interesting developments there. You mentioned earlier on that there is perhaps this shift among brand loyalty.
Yes.
I grew up in a household where we were very loyal to a single brand, and we had always had that same automotive brand in our garage and in our driveway. But it sounds like the study might be finding changing results.
Yes, that's true. I think in most cases across markets, we see a decline in kind of propensity to stick with the same brand. Certainly in the US, that has declined and fallen below 50% in recent past. But you compare that to other markets where, say, in India or China, for instance, well, India in particular, but also China, we see 70% kind of propensity to switch. But you think about the massive amount of options that also exist in those cases at low cost, right? There's a lot more potential for switching.
Yeah, are there reasons that we found in the research, or do you have ideas about why maybe this loyalty has declined from levels we might have seen decades ago?
We don't know all the root causes, to be honest, because we haven't really dug into that. But when you think about the different kind of, what is the competitive set in the markets, like I just mentioned, in China, you have a massive number of very low cost and perceived high quality options for consumers. And what we know is the barrier to entry in a lot of cases is at the top, cost, right? The cost of this technology. And so fundamentally, if there's lower cost options that are highly competitive, the driving experience is compelling. There's a lot of interest in improved environmental impact. If there's a wide array of options there's significant potential for switching. And I think our US-based OEMs also have the opportunity to learn about, well, what is that, what are the learnings from those markets that we can take, not just in terms of the technology and the cost for that technology, but also you mentioned the in-cabin experience, and what is the level of trust that differs between Southeast Asia or China versus in the US or the UK, for instance, where there's a lot greater suspicion, right, around, well, where is AI in the car? And I love this dashboard experience, but how is my data being used? And I think, again, a lot to learn about how do we generate or get to a point of trust. Goes back to your question, too, about loyalty.
Yeah.
So a lot of great opportunity to think about how to solve for it. Doesn't mean we have all the kind of details around, where does that really stem from?
That's been one of the things I've really noticed, not only this year at CES, but in past years, is all of the new vehicle offerings that are coming to market, and they're using CES to launch new brands. Maybe they're a traditional ICE manufacturer and they've used CES to launch their BEV models. We're seeing that this year at CES for sure. We're also seeing some brand new vehicle companies here at CES again this year, something we've seen for many years. And so I think that also, to your point, plays into that loyalty. That dynamic is that you've got new brands to choose from. And when you see what they're bringing to market here at CES, you're like, wow, that is a gorgeous vehicle with amazing technology. And I think I'm interested in it. I'm interested in trying that. You also highlighted the dynamics around trust when it comes to autonomy and when it comes to AI. What do you see in the research around how consumers are perceiving trust, but also how they're perceiving this broader narrative of AI and automation and everything we're hearing about here at CES, but also all of the things that are showing up inside of the vehicle?
Well, let me step back and talk about kind of two pieces of the same puzzle. One is autonomous, the other one is AI, right? So if you think about autonomous operations, vehicle operations, one of the biggest challenges or concerns that we see in markets where there is more congestion, right? More driving, more congestion, where we have less mass transit. So think the US, think India, in some cases the UK, right? There's a lot more concern over autonomous operations, pure autonomous operations, fundamentally. But then on the flip side, and joined to that, is AI. So I had mentioned before that there are other markets where there's a greater degree of trust and expectation, like in China, for instance, around the interoperability and integration of AI in the entirety of vehicle operations, right? But I would say the one thing that all agree on is that where we want to have embedded AI and where we would be more willing to pay for it as consumers is around safety and operations of the vehicle. So think about lane departure warnings or automated braking and things like that that enhance the safety of the driving experience. But it'll take time to get comfortable with pure autonomous.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're really seeing here at CES is what's happening in autonomous vehicles. I know the study doesn't dive into this, but also the broadening of autonomous experiences and autonomous solutions. So delivery robots or other solutions that are taking advantage of autonomy. And all of that, I think, will contribute to how good technology can be. We're seeing autonomous vehicle companies here at CES highlight their next generation vehicles, which are using more sensors to improve the quality and also to expand what they're able to do. So they're now able to move into maybe more challenging environments, more challenging markets, whether it's weather or driving conditions, moving from right-hand drive only to left-hand drive. So you're seeing that continue to expand here at CES. And it sounds like in the study, you're also seeing that consumers are perhaps growing more comfortable with it, and certainly within certain countries are already there, very comfortable with that.
No doubt.
What are some other things that you see from the research around AI? Are there other dynamics that you see rising to the surface as we think about the future of AI? Clearly, it's a story that's quite pronounced here this year at CES, and I think it's something that's going to continue to be at the forefront.
Well, I think it's AI in the entirety of the value chain in the automotive space that we're really excited about at Deloitte. And we don't go into this in the study, obviously, in depth, but I'll give you one example of what's changing and where do we think the industry is going. And that is when you think about mobility as a service options, right? So we've focused in this conversation around the biggest challenge being for OEMs managing this broad set of powertrain options and thinking about, again, where to play and how to win by market. But a very interesting and compelling trend that we also see is for younger consumers or first-time automotive, buyers. The reality is across markets globally, we have much greater interest in, ride share and mobility solutions, less interest in ownership of assets, right? So back to your question, AI, right? How do you think about, from an OEM standpoint, managing AI when you think about engaging with a customer, right? When you think about offering solutions, there are a lot of different ways to sell or serve consumers with automotive solutions. So I would say it's not just in the driving experience that we've already talked about. We gave examples around AI to enable safety, but it's also what can AI do to help create solutions for mobility where you as a consumer can find the right vehicle at the right time, be prompted for when that vehicle might require maintenance, and effectively not have to think and put a lot of energy into managing an asset. So I think that's the other area where, again, across the entirety of the value chain, AI has great potential.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think one of the things I see broadly happening with AI is that it does help lift some of the cognitive load. So when we think about generative AI, it's helping lift some of the cognitive load of restructuring and reorganizing information. You certainly see it playing out here at CS where AI is helping to streamline some of the decisions and automate some of the decisions we might make. And it's interesting that the study highlights this growth in mobility as a service, because it hadn't occurred to me until you just mentioned, at least, that that's another area where we can start to lift some of the cognitive load. We don't need to think about oil changes or maintenance or recalls or other things like that, because we're just taking advantage of it when we need it. Were there any key insights when you look at mobility as a service? Is there certain demographics or certain age cohorts that are most interested in mobility as a service?
Sure. I think, well, as I mentioned, it is more of the younger consumer contingents across the board in all markets who are more interested in those types of solutions and frankly have had more experience and are kind of the digitally native engaging with vehicles and transportation, through their phone, right? So that's without question. I think, in addition, what we see, at least in the US, is that, we work with organizations, for instance, who are investing in supporting individuals like single working mothers, for instance, who really do not have the time and do not have the expertise to manage asset ownership, right? And who really require other support and services to help with the maintenance and the insurance of that product and of that vehicle. So I think it depends on the markets, but just as a case in point, right, it is younger consumers and then individuals, again, who, using your words, Shawn, need to remove that cognitive load and the burden of the complexity that is required in asset ownership and maintenance.
Yeah, and the vehicles, as we see here at CS, are becoming ever more complex, ever more dynamic. What they can do is growing. And when you think about mobility as a service, certainly we tend to tie it to some of the automotive services and self-driving. And those technologies are also getting better. We see all of that playing out here at CES. How many years has Deloitte been doing this study now, the Global Automotive Consumer Study?
It's been well over a decade now.
Wow.
Shawn, we started the study in 2010, so we've seen a lot of change year over year over that course of time. So certainly available online to all of our viewers here is all of the studies over time. And we do track year over year in our current study,
Awesome.
What were the bigger trends that we've seen on an annual basis.
Yeah, to have that time series, especially over the last decade, is awesome because there has been so much change.
No question.
It would be incredible to compare this study over 10 years to, say, the 1950s and 1960s, where we were maybe changing some of the interior features or we were changing some of the other attributes of the vehicle, but we weren't seeing massive shifts from, when it comes to drivetrain or self-driving, of course, and all of these other dynamics. When you look ahead, what are some of the things that you're excited for? Certainly with the backdrop of CES, we're glimpsing into the future. We're looking at what's coming next. What are some of the things that get you excited when you look at the automotive sector?
I mean, fundamentally, it's just everything you talked about. This is the most exciting time to be in this sector, right? The auto industry is undergoing the biggest change since really the establishment of the ICE vehicle well over 100 years ago as the primary kind of mode and powertrain operations in the sector, right? And I would say automotive is undergoing the greatest transformation of any sector. So I absolutely love the fact that we get the chance to be influencing, outcomes at this point in time. But I would say if we think about what are the biggest opportunities, right? Challenge, opportunity at the same time, right? It goes back to three things: powertrain, loyalty, and infrastructure, right? Powertrain in terms of managing that complexity of offerings, where to play, how to win. Loyalty in terms of figuring out how to really drive improved customer commitment from an OEM all the way through a dealer in cases where that is the kind of distribution mode. And then fundamentally, that infrastructure. I really hope that we all have the opportunity to engage between commercial and public policy to figure out that right investment in private, residential, as well as commercial public infrastructure.
Yeah, it's awesome to think about how important strategy has become for anyone in the auto supply chain, that it isn't just about delivering parts or vehicles along some time horizon, but it's actually the complexity has grown, as you note, that there's so much complexity at every single segment of the auto sector. So it'll be exciting to see what the future brings. Certainly here at CS, we get to look into the future and see what some of those things might bring. Lisa, thanks so much for talking to me a little bit about Deloitte's Global Automotive Consumer Study. It sounds like an awesome study. You can take a look at it on Deloitte.com, and of course, there'll be a link to it in the comments here for this. So we encourage you to take a look and to think about what comes next. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Shawn.